Hey everyone, Disappointed Giant here. Viewers have requested a handful of different Dead Cells videos over the past several months, but what I've seen more than anything else are comments asking for a mutations guide. If this is you, then you're in luck. I just uploaded 2 videos to the channel. The first is this video, which is a scripted and general overview of mutation mechanics and strategies. The other is a tier list that discusses all of the mutations in the game. If you're interested in hearing my thoughts and some history on each mutation, then I recommend checking that video out as well. There's a link in the description. Since the tier guide will go pretty deep, this video is going to be more of a general guide. I'll go over some basics of mutation mechanics, how each color's mutations generally work and relate to one another, and we'll talk about some staple mutations that might help you have some more successful runs. Since mutations are a fundamental part of any Dead Cells run, let's start at the very beginning. After you make it through the prisoners' quarters, you'll run into an NPC standing next to a pile of dead bodies that are supposed to be from your past failed runs. Initially, you can choose between 11 basic mutations, 3 for each color and 2 colorless ones. The initial mutations are meant to give a quiet tutorial for how each color's playstyle mainly works. 2 of the 3 brutality mutations are focused around melee combat, with the third being a combination of damage reduction and DPS increase. The tactics mutations revolve around ranged attacks and damage buffs. And survival's mutations are mainly for either parrying or for healing. As you increase your stats through the scrolls you pick up in your runs, any scaling mutations of that color will have their effects increased. Let's take the survival mutation Blind Faith as an example. At 1 survival stat, it provides a 2.8 second cooldown after a successful parry. At 2 stats, that increases to 2.9 seconds. With each scroll, the amount of cooldown you receive gets bigger until it caps out at a whopping 6 seconds at 32 scrolls. While it's technically possible to take any mutation with any color build, you're generally going to want to maximize their potential by taking ones that match the color of your build. So you could theoretically take combo in a tactics melee build, but it won't provide the same return on investment like it would in a brutality build, since the scaling of red scrolls will help maximize combo's potential. While you start with only 11 mutations, there's a total of 53 in the game. This means a lot of options and combinations that you can use to add some flair and some extra utility to your builds. If you're having trouble choosing a mutation for your primary color, you can always scroll down the list to the colorless mutations. These aren't tied to any particular color, hence colorless, and most generally they'll provide a flat bonus regardless of how many stats you have. Something like Velocity, which multiplies the time of your speed boost by 3, or Ammo, which doubles your ammo, will work the same regardless of what your stat spread looks like. The 2 exceptions for this are Frostbite, which does damage over time to enemies that are slowed or frozen, and Instinct of the Master of Arms, which provides skill cooldown with critical hits. These 2 mutations will both scale with your highest stat regardless of color. The game requires you to take 3 mutations, 1 after the first biome, another after the second, and a final one after the third. From that point forward, you will always need to have 3 mutations in your build. Even if you re-roll and change things up, you won't be able to choose just 1 or 2. If you do want to swap mutations, you can do this from the mutation selection menu. You'll see an option at the top of the screen that allows you to remove your current mutations and replace them with other available ones for a cost. The prices for rerolls are always the same, regardless of where you are in your run or what difficulty level you're playing on. The first reroll is 1,000 gold, the second is 2,000, the third is 4,000, and every roll after that is 8,000. As a general rule of thumb, it's smart to know how much your next reroll will cost so you can make sure that you have some spare change kicking around in case you need to change things up. Before you can change your mutations, you'll need to choose your mutations. As I mentioned earlier, it's generally best practice to take the mutations that are the same color as your build so you can squeeze the most juice out of them. It's also important to holistically think about your personal playstyle, what items you're using, and what you're looking to get out of your run. Let's take Brutality as an example. While there are some ranged weapons available to use in that color, most brutality mutations revolve around bonuses from using melee attacks. So if you're wielding a Panchaku or a Pure Nail, it makes sense to lean into choices like Combo or Predator. If you're using a ranged item like throwing knives, those mutations are going to be wasted because they won't proc with ranged items. If you're just starting out and only have those basic mutations available, I recommend sticking with the ones for your color to see how they work and experiment with how they fit within that stat's general playstyle. You can also save your first choice for Yigdar Oris Leox, which will grant you an extra life but locks the mutation slot so it can't be removed. It's also important to think about where you are in your current run when choosing which mutations to pick. Since you can reroll them between each level, it's a good idea to think about switching them up before you fight a boss. There are some mutations that are great for biomes but not helpful for bosses, and vice versa. Something like Support, which grants bonus damage when you're close to a deployed skill, is going to be generally helpful since you'll be able to benefit from the extra DPS regardless of whether you're in a biome or fighting a boss. Something like Killer Instinct, which grants skill cooldown with each melee kill, can be strong to use in biomes but won't be helpful against most bosses since they don't provide many cooldown opportunities for the mutation. As I usually do, I recommend checking out the Dead Cells wiki so you can get some more information on each mutation. The wiki goes into detail on how they all work and will show the raw numbers of how their effects increase as your stats increase. You can also check out my mutations tier list, which will go through the wiki as I talk and will show stat details for each mutation in depth. So let's review the basics so far. First, it's a good idea to generally stay on color when choosing your base mutations. Second, colorless mutations can fit in any color build. And third, it's smart to save some of your money and consider respeccing your mutations before or after a boss fight to get the best use out of your kit. If you adhere to these 3 general guidelines, you might see some improvements in your runs. But what about taking mutations off color? If you do take mutations from a different color, it's best to take ones that have high base percentage bonuses instead of flat damage bonuses. Let's take a look at Point Blank and Ranger's Gear, 2 tactics mutations, side by side so we can see the difference. At 1 tactics stat, Point Blank will provide a 30% increase for close-ranged ranged attacks. Personally, I'd say that Point Blank is a decent option to take off color since 30% is a pretty nice bonus that could be helpful for a brutality build that's using something like throwing knives or infantry bow. In this example, would it be better to take Point Blank with the tactics build? Of course, but can that mutation work in a brutality build? Absolutely. Our second example is the Ranger's Gear mutation, which provides a low flat damage bonus on your next attack after using a skill. This number scales up to specific values with each tactic stat, so the more purple you have in your build, the more effective this mutation will be. If you took this in a brutality build that had 1 stat in tactics, your bonus damage would be 180 damage. If you have 4 stats, you'll get 274 bonus damage. That is not a lot of damage, especially in later biomes where using this mutation equates to throwing a paper airplane at a charging golem. Ranger's Gear is only effective when taking a tactics build, so there's no good reason to take this off color. If you think about the differences between percentage bonuses and flat damage bonuses, you'll start to see some patterns with other mutation stats so you can pick and choose which ones might be viable outside of their usual color. Something like Porcupac can work in a non-brutality build since it starts at a fair value of 75%, but Counterattack won't work in a non-survival build because it has such a low flat damage bonus. It can get a little complicated because these guidelines aren't always set in stone, but like I mentioned earlier, it's helpful to know both what you're looking to get out of your run as well as having general knowledge of how each mutation scales. So if you're looking to add a little bit more excitement into your runs, which off-color mutations should you take and when should you take them? For off-color brutality mutations, Vengeance is a great option since it always provides 30% damage reduction regardless of your brutality scroll count. Its initial base DPS increase is 60%, so in theory, you could take this with any build and get some really good utility after taking a hit, regardless of color. Predator and Melee can both work off color too. Even though the time of your invincibility or slowing the enemy won't be very long, these mutations can still give you just enough of a combat edge on your enemies by letting you either slip into the shadows or by slowing an enemy in pursuit. This is also a good time to mention that while Open Wounds is technically listed under the Brutality section, it will scale with the highest stat of your melee weapon and the gear level of that weapon, regardless of its color. So for all intents and purposes, Open Wounds is a colorless mutation and can be used as such. If you're not maining tactics, the previously mentioned Point Blank is a good choice, with support and tranquility also being solid. Their base percentage bonuses are all pretty decent and sometimes can be a great choice if you're using a colorless or legendary version of a weapon that goes outside of your main color's normal playstyle. Couple examples for this might be like taking support on a Brutality run when you get a Tesla coil from a curse chest, or using Tranquility with a survival build when you find a legendary marksman bow. For survival mutations, Blind Faith and What Doesn't Kill Me can work pretty well off color with builds that have some kind of parry capability, whether it's through using a shield or something like the Iron Staff or Cocoon. Also, Armadillo Pack is pretty much always a good choice, survival or not, so I frequently recommend that mutation and use it all the time myself, regardless of build color. And finally, I'd like to give special mention to what I call the Holy Trinity of mutations: Masochist, Disengagement, and Gastronomy. When I first started playing Dead Cells, these mutations saved countless runs. Some of my earliest 5BC clears would have failed miserably if not for this setup. Masochist caps trap damage at 10% of your health and provides a 20-second speed boost, assumedly to help you hightail it to safety out of whatever situation you're in. This mutation is excellent in levels like the Distillery or in challenge rifts. Disengagement will save you from one run-ending hit in each biome, so you'll be able to almost get wrecked and still live to see another day. Disengagement does not protect against curse deaths. And finally, Gastronomy provides a 65% boost to all food sources, so instead of small food healing for 15%, it will heal for 25%. And instead of large food healing for 50%, it will heal 83%. So here's some food for thought. One piece of large food with Gastro will heal 23% more than a flask does. In a food shop, the Big Eats will cost 4,000 gold, which is only 1/5 of the 20,000 gold a flask recharge costs. That alone makes Gastro really useful. So if you pick all three of these mutations, you'll have damage mitigation from traps, what basically equates to an extra life once in every level, and a boost to food effect so you can more easily recover the health you might lose along the way. While I love offensive mutations, it's hard to not recommend this set for folks who are trying to get some extra wins under their belt in a safer way. With 53 different mutations, there are tons of possibilities on how to effectively round out and charge up your build. Hopefully this guide helped provide some information that you can use to choose the best options for what your build needs at different points in your run. You may find that a certain few mutations will always do the trick, or maybe it'll take you some time to find which ones will click with your playstyle. Regardless of where you land, I do recommend checking out the wiki to look over the information on stats and scaling, and I highly recommend taking the time to experiment with the mutations that you have available to see for yourself how those mutations work. If you're still hungry for more mutation information after this video, you can head on over to my tier list from the link in the description. That video will probably be like 10 times longer than this video and will have an improvised analysis, history, and discussion for all 53 mutations. Leave a comment below if you have any questions or if you want to talk more about any specific mutations. I'm also curious to hear about some of the interesting combinations that you might come up with on your own, so if you find something fun, let me know. As always, thank you for watching, and good luck out there.